Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Farbach. Tensions between Budapest and Kyiv have escalated after Prime Minister Viktor Orban accused President Volodymyr Zelensky of moral blackmail amid Ukraine's push for European Union membership and continued military support. As the EU weighs its approach to aiding Ukraine both militarily and diplomatically, we're here now joined by Jakub Jaraczewski Research Coordinator at Democracy Reporting International to discuss it further. Hello and thanks for joining us here on TVP World.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
I want to ask about your immediate reaction and to the significance of this latest spat, this exchange that's been on social media. What's your takeaway here, and what will this mean for relations between not just Hungary, but also Ukraine and the EU?
I think that the background for this particular spat between the Prime Minister Orban and President Zelensky is quite clear. The European Union is discussing how to progress on the accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova in face of Hungarian resistance, primarily aimed at the Ukrainian bid to join the European Union. Adjusting the rules for starting the negotiations, accessions, or in a way circumventing the Hungarian resistance by opening sort of technical consultations without formal starting of opening of accession negotiation chapters. And in the front of this, there is quite a lot of visible politics from both sides, from Hungary and Ukraine, but also from the EU. And that is, I think, the background and the reason for this particular flare-up.
Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, let's just put it in context as well. I mean, it's no secret that Viktor Orban's Hungary has been very much against pretty much anything to do with supporting Ukraine. But at the same time, looking at also the recent statement and what started this spat, I mean, if we're looking at President Zelensky's statement that with or without Orban, Ukraine will join the EU. I mean, just that statement, I know we have to get it into context, but at the same time, what do you make of that statement itself? I mean, it's not, I mean, that can inflame tensions. I'm just wondering why Zelensky would say something like that.
I think that President Zelensky is trying to, in a way, appeal to the other EU member state leaders to encourage them to come up with a possible solution that would mitigate the Hungarian resistance and would in a way downplay the influence Viktor Orban has. It's kind of a recurring theme that Viktor Orban has been embarking on the sort of brinkmanship in many areas of EU policy, where Hungary would resist and would wield its power of veto in anonymous agreement situations towards some kind of concessions or some kind of change of tune from the other EU member states. And I think what Zelensky is doing is trying to show that he has the backing of majority of EU member states, and he feels confident that those EU member states that support Ukraine will be able to circumvent the veto from Hungary, and so that the resistance in a way is futile as the EU will find a way. The question, of course, is actually Zelensky has those cards in his hand, and whether there is actually a way forward for the other EU member states to mitigate the resistance from Hungary.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about mitigating the resistance, but at the same time, if we look procedurally, I don't want to get into all the rules that make enlargement possible, but procedurally, there is still that requirement, right? There's unanimity of all member states. I mean, a technical workaround, isn't that a slippery slope?
Of course, it is a slippery slope for many reasons. Even if the EU were not to begin formally the next step of negotiations pending Hungarian resistance, and instead would resort to holding technical level talks and trying to work on those areas in the background without a formal start of negotiation procedure, that would not only be in a way circumventing the EU's own rules, but also for Ukraine and perhaps also for Moldova, a situation where already work has to be done and political capital has to be expended on reforms and on alignment with EU rules without having formally opened the next step of the procedure. That is also a risk. At some point, you have to come back home and show something that there is progress. And both the government in Ukraine and in Moldova have very heavily baked the EU accession into their political messaging and are basically telling their citizens, look, with us, you're going to advance and we are going to join the EU sooner or later. And if those new steps aren't unlocked and instead work is just being done in the background, that might be politically damaging both for the EU and for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we know Orban always wants something. He's very much a smooth operator in this. But I'm curious now, I mean, he's been so harsh against Ukraine. He's been a close friend of Vladimir Putin's. But energy, that is a key thing for him. He's been so dependent on Russia. But I'm curious what you make of this latest development. If we're looking at Hungary's recent gas diversification deals, looking with France and also Britain's Shell, how is that going to soften his tone? Or is this largely just symbolic?
I think that the biggest pressure on Viktor Orban currently is the looming parliamentary election in Hungary and the fact that his party Fidesz is falling behind the opposition maverick Peter Magyar and his TISA party, who are very much messaging against Orban. And so I believe that Viktor Orban will be seeking ways to ease the impact of the energy crisis on the country and will be seeking to diversify in order to be able to show back home that he is making life easier for Hungarians, that the costs are going down. It's been a consistent theme that in a way Orban has been affected negatively by his reliance on Russia. However, has been hard-pressed to diversify and move away from that. So in a way, it's a very tricky situation for him to maintain the close ties with Russia, especially on the energy front, and at the same time to be able to find new sources and lower the costs back home. I think that also one thing which might be very soon impacting is the Ukraine's increased campaign of attacks against the Russian oil and gas industry. We are seeing more and more hits against refineries and against energy infrastructure that will sooner or later drive up the costs and will force shortages. And in that situation, Hungary might find itself that it might be willing to pay for Russian energy, but this energy just simply isn't there or is significantly more expensive than initially agreed.
Mm-hmm. But I'm also just curious, I mean, the interesting thing is here, and I think when you mentioned TISA, the opposition party, and Peter Magyar, who is very much polling in healthy numbers at the moment. We'll see how that turns out in the spring. But nevertheless, I mean, one of the elements was about cost of living, about energy. I mean, if Orban now pivots to kind of, let's say, call it, quote unquote, fix the situation, how much does that damage TISA's, let's say, chances, or is there still enough momentum? How do you see this working out? Because energy seems to be a big pillar here.
It's hard to say, but one consistent pattern which we have seen that TISA is trying to avoid engaging Orban on his terms. And when Viktor Orban and Fidesz pivot to a certain topic, be it LGBT rights or be it energy, TISA is turning attention of the voters elsewhere and is pointing to corruption, is pointing to the healthcare crisis, which is also a huge and increasing problem in Hungary, and is smartly trying to move away from getting boxed in those topics where at this particular moment Viktor Orban feels the strongest, and instead Magyar and TISA reach for those topics that resonate with the voters, but where Fidesz does not have easy and good answers. So we will see how it plays, of course, but I think that perhaps for the first time in a very long time, Viktor Orban has found his match.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. I just about to conclude here. I just want to get your quick response, just really briefly. I mean, we have also changing government in the region, still with the ANO victory of in the Czech Republic, Mr. Babiš. How much does that also calculate in all of this, just briefly at the end?
I believe that Mr. Babiš, while definitely less enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine than Peter Fiala's government was, will not embark on such a brinkmanship politics like Orban and Fico, though ultimately Babiš enjoys being part of the mainstream, and he is very much fond of being part of a broader EU agreement on something. And while definitely I think that changes will be made and some elements of support for Ukraine that Czechia has been providing will probably diminish, however, in the broader picture, Babiš definitely does not want himself to be seen as pro-Russian, and very much enjoys messaging back home that the Czech government is working with its partners in the other EU member states. I don't think this will be a huge impact, although definitely this very strong enthusiasm that we saw for Ukraine and for Moldova from the departing Czech government will be definitely gone.
Okay, so will remain an interesting dynamic in the region for sure. Look, we'll conclude it there. Thank you so much, Jakub Jaraczewski. Appreciate all the insights today. And thank you for watching. That concludes this edition of World Talks, but stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.